Willem ten Rhyne, a Dutch physician, found himself cast by fate into 17th century Japan, a country then closed off from the rest of the world. This distant, mysterious archipelago, strictly forbidding entry to foreigners, nevertheless allowed him to set foot on its soil, making him a pioneer at the edge of the known world. There, amidst ancient traditions and unfamiliar customs, he witnessed what the West considered impossible, a form of medicine that utilized neither scalpels nor poisons, a healing art based on fine needles and cauterization. Against the prevailing attitudes of his time, he did the unthinkable. Instead of dismissing these practices as barbaric or superstitious, he meticulously, with true scientific rigor, studied the local methods of acupuncture and moxibustion. Year after year, he documented every step, systematized the knowledge, and drew detailed atlases of points and meridians. He wasn't merely an observer. He learned from Japanese masters, grasping the essence of their techniques. He became the first to bring a reliable, detailed description of acupuncture to the West. His works, published in Europe, did more than just inform. They challenged the very foundations of conventional Western medicine. It was extraordinary. This knowledge, arriving from a distant Eastern land, opened a new, unexplored chapter in the history of global medicine. This is not a story of a brilliant inventor suddenly struck by insight under an apple tree. It's not a myth of a lone scientist who, in isolation, overturned the world overnight. Scientific discoveries rarely happen that way. More often, they are the result of a convergence of civilizations, a fusion of knowledge, persistent effort, and the courage of an individual who dared to look beyond the familiar horizon. Willem ten Rhyne was precisely such a person. His story is not only about acupuncture's first step into the West, but also a powerful reminder. True progress is born at the intersection of cultures, in the willingness to learn from others, reject dogmas, and embrace the new. But before this knowledge flooded into the West, what was the medicine like that it was poised to change? In 17th century Europe, medical practice remained shackled by dogmas inherited from deep antiquity. The authority of Galen and Hippocrates, who had written a millennium and a half earlier, was unassailable. Their treatises, filled with theories about the four humors of the body, dictated every medical decision. Any doubt cast upon these teachings was considered not only a professional error, but also a dangerous assault on the established order. Medical practice was often brutal and ineffective. Bloodletting was universally applied, considered a panacea for all ailments, though it often only weakened patients. Surgery was barbaric, devoid of anesthesia and antiseptics. Open wounds were frequently cauterized with red-hot irons or boiling oil, causing unbearable pain and often leading to fatal infections. Pus flowing from wounds was paradoxically considered a laudable sign of healing, rather than a signal of a catastrophic bacterial attack. In this world, where suffering was commonplace and death often came not from the disease itself, but from the treatment, the hope of recovery was fleeting. It was into this era, steeped in ignorance and entrenched misconceptions, that Willem ten Rhyne was born in the Netherlands. Hailing from a country where the seeds of a new empirical science were already taking root, he received a classical medical education, adhering to the standards of his time. However, his inquisitive mind could not blindly accept everything he was taught. Working in overcrowded hospitals, he daily confronted a harsh reality. He witnessed patients, already weakened by ailments, dying from bloodletting. He observed how wounds, which should have healed, became inflamed after cauterization, claiming lives. This personal experience, these dreadful observations, compelled him to doubt the infallibility of traditional methods. He sought answers that he couldn't find in ancient, dust-laden treatises, and this quest would one day lead him to the ends of the earth. It was this very quest, this insatiable desire for answers, that led him to the Far East. Once in Japan, Willem ten Rhyne did not merely observe exotic practices. He immersed himself in them, methodically studying every aspect. His journals, filled with meticulous handwriting, were replete with drawings of body points, diagrams of meridians, and detailed descriptions of procedures. He witnessed how Japanese healers, using the finest needles and smoldering cones of mugwort, achieved results that seemed impossible in the West. But observing was one thing. Applying it in practice was quite another. The moment of truth arrived when he encountered a problem for which European medicine offered no solution. One of his patients, a Japanese fisherman, presented with a deep, severely infected wound on his leg. The wound was extensive, and by all European medical standards, it required cauterization. This would have been an agonizing procedure, but it was considered the only way to halt the spread of infection. Willem prepared for the procedure, He arranged his instruments and ordered oil to be heated. But then, an unexpected hitch occurred. The oil supplies needed for cauterization were running low. What remained would not be enough for a complete treatment of such a large wound. The situation was critical. Leaving the wound untreated meant almost certain death for the patient. Using an insufficient amount of oil would only prolong his torment. In that moment, standing over the suffering man, he made a decision that went against everything he had been taught in Leiden. He recalled how the Japanese masters he had studied worked with inflammations using their needles and the warmth of moxa. He had seen their calm demeanor, their confidence in the method, and he knew he had nothing to lose. He set aside the heated instrument. Instead, he took up a set of fine needles and prepared dried mugwort. He carefully examined the wound. Then, following the atlases he himself had compiled, he gently inserted several needles around the site of infection. Then, he cautiously applied small cones of mugwort to specific points and lit them. The warmth slowly penetrated the tissues, not burning, but stimulating. Hours of anxious waiting followed. He meticulously monitored the patient, noting the slightest changes. To his astonishment, the very next day, he saw what he could not explain from the perspective of European dogmas. The inflammation began to subside. The pain lessened. Within a few days, the wound, which should have festered and killed the man, began to cleanse and clear. Without bloodletting, without agonizing cauterization, without poisonous concoctions. This case became a turning point. It wasn't just the healing of a patient. It was personal confirmation that the world of medicine was far broader than he could have imagined. It was an undeniable, tangible, empirical breakthrough that proved the efficacy of Japanese methods. Willem ten Rhyne was no longer just an observer. He became a convinced advocate, ready to bring this knowledge to the world. His conviction was merely the beginning. To bridge the gap between two worlds, he had to translate the unfamiliar into the familiar, the mystical into the scientific. His tools were not only needles and mugwort, but also his sharp mind, accustomed to meticulous systematization. He didn't just describe what he saw. He deconstructed Japanese practice, breaking it down into its minute elements. The precise location of points, the complex pathways of meridians, specific stimulation methods. He sought an internal logic where Europeans, lacking context, would have seen only shamanism or a peculiar ritual. His approach was the embodiment of pure empiricism. While Western medicine rested on the speculative theories of Galen and Hippocrates, Willem ten Rhyne trusted only what he saw with his own eyes and could verify. He did not accept things on faith. He repeated procedures, carefully compared results before and after, and recorded every, even the most minor, change in patients' conditions. This was not blind faith, but a rigorous testing of hypotheses. He didn't just believe in acupuncture. He proved its efficacy, transforming ancient Asian wisdom into a tangible, reproducible European scientific fact. But how to convey this to a world steeped in skepticism? Only through publications capable of speaking the language of science. His monumental work, De Acupunctura, published in Latin, the universal language of European scholarship at the time, became the first comprehensive and reliable description of acupuncture and moxibustion. He didn't just translate words, he translated concepts, extracting them from Eastern mysticism and framing them within Western rationalism. He complemented his works with strikingly detailed illustrations, anatomically precise drawings of the body, on which invisible meridians were charted, transforming them into tangible pathways. Obscure points became precise coordinates, accessible for study and application. He did not invent physical needles, but he invented a way for the Western mind to understand their action, essentially creating the first textbook on acupuncture for European physicians. This was not just a book, but a methodical guide designed to educate and persuade, demonstrating. Eastern medicine was not magic, but a complex yet learnable technology requiring study and mastery. Knowledge flooded into the West, but it was not met with open arms. For the established medical world, ten Rhyne's works were not a long-awaited breakthrough, but a dangerous encroachment. They threatened not only their authority, but also the entire centuries-old dogmatic system, where the authority of ancient texts was unshakable. Physicians, who devoutly believed in Galen's theories of the four humors, saw acupuncture as ridiculous exoticism, a primitive barbaric superstition. How could one treat with fine needles when recognized methods demanded massive bloodletting, brutal cauterization, and potent poisons? Where was the scientific evidence if there was no explanation through the balance of phlegm, blood, yellow, and black bile? Accusations poured in immediately, as if from a horn of plenty. He was called an eccentric, a charlatan, a deceiver, even a heretic, assailing the sacred tenets of medicine. The idea that illness could be cured without pain, without blood, without surgical intervention, without suffering, seemed utterly absurd to them. It undermined their entire worldview, where patient suffering was almost a guarantee of treatment efficacy. Some influential professors, pillars of medical faculties, openly ridiculed his works in lectures and treatises, calling them the fantasies of an ignorant Dutchman captivated by Asian superstitions. They pointed to the lack of anatomical explanations for meridians, to the unscientific nature of approaches that didn't fit their paradigm. For them, it was an absurdity, unworthy of a serious scientist's attention, a waste of time. Yet Willem ten Rhyne also had his supporters. Not everyone in Europe clung to outdated dogmas. There were those who, like him, were weary of the obvious ineffectiveness of traditional medicine and sought new paths. These were forward-thinking minds, empirical philosophers, natural scientists, who were already beginning to doubt the infallibility of ancient authorities and sought confirmation through experience. They saw in his works not a threat, but a beacon of hope, an opportunity for development. Some influential patrons, who might have included members of European academies, university professors, and at times wealthy benefactors, were open enough to new ideas to support him. They didn't just read his works, they observed the few physicians who dared to apply ten Rhyne's methods and witnessed real results. Healings that could not be explained by old dogmas spoke for themselves louder than any theoretical debates. These early successes, though few, became a reliable shield for Willem ten Rhyne, protecting him from complete oblivion and discredit. They provided his revolutionary ideas with a platform, allowing them to take root in the soil of European science despite fierce resistance and ridicule. But for these roots to truly grow, more than just a platform was needed. A triumph was required. Not a private healing, but public, undeniable proof. And it did not take long to materialize. In Leiden, the city of his student years, Willem ten Rhyne received an official invitation. The medical faculty of the local university, a bastion of centuries-old traditions, formed a commission. Its task, a thorough evaluation of the Japanese methods about which persistent rumors were already circulating throughout Europe. This was a pivotal moment. At the meeting, in the presence of the most influential professors, ten Rhyne did not merely read his treatises. He presented a patient, a young man suffering from chronic pain that European medicine could not alleviate. Numerous bloodlettings, cauterizations, all had been useless. The pain persisted. Under the scrutinizing gaze of skeptics, Willem ten Rhyne demonstrated what he had learned in Japan. He used no scalpel. There was no blood, no cries. Only fine needles, inserted into precisely defined points, and the gentle warmth of smoldering mugwort. Day after day, the commission observed, and day after day, the patient's pain receded. His condition improved. His face, contorted by suffering, smoothed out. Within 1 week, the young man could stand. Within 2, he walked confidently, almost forgetting his ailment. This case, documented and confirmed by all members of the commission, became undeniable proof. Not just a theory, it was a fact. For the first time, acupuncture received official, academic recognition in the West. Ten Rhyne, once a ridiculed eccentric, now stood as a man who had proven his point. His ideas were no longer Asian superstitions. They became a subject of serious scientific inquiry. He didn't just survive the onslaught of criticism, he triumphed. Ten Rhyne's triumph ignited a spark. He did not demolish the old world of medicine overnight, but he began to change it. The first thing that shifted was the perception of pain and suffering. If pain was once considered an inevitable part of treatment, physicians now began to consider methods that alleviated it, rather than exacerbated it. The practice of bloodletting, though not entirely eliminated, became significantly less frequent, especially in cases of chronic ailments. Open wounds were less often cauterized with red-hot irons, replaced by less traumatic methods that stimulated healing. Statistics, though collected sporadically, began to speak for themselves. In hospitals where physicians dared to apply acupuncture and moxibustion, a decrease in mortality from infections was observed, particularly in the treatment of chronic inflammatory processes. Patients with certain types of paralysis, neuralgias, and rheumatic pains, who had previously been condemned to lifelong suffering, now found relief. On an institutional level, changes were gradual but irreversible. Rhyne's work, the Acupunctura, began to be republished and translated into French, German, and English. It became mandatory reading for progressive physicians. In some universities, timidly at first, then with increasing confidence, the first courses dedicated to Eastern healing methods began to appear. These were not full departments, but they were initial steps. The most significant change occurred in consciousness. Scientists and physicians began to realize that other, non-European paths to healing existed. This opened the doors for further research, for the study of other aspects of Eastern medicine. Willem Rhyne's acupuncture became the first, but not the last bridge between East and West in the field of medicine. It demonstrated that true progress knows no boundaries and is not tied to a single continent or tradition. Willem Rhyne's work did not conclude with his triumph in Leiden. He did not revolutionize Western medicine overnight. He merely planted a seed that grew for centuries, slowly but inexorably changing consciousness. His legacy is not an instant revolution, but an enduring echo of what happens when the scientific method encounters foreign wisdom. It is a story of how one person, discarding dogmas, proved that knowledge capable of healing is not bound by continents or traditions. It serves as a powerful reminder. True progress is genuinely born at the intersection of cultures, in the willingness to learn from others, to reject old truths, and to embrace the new, even if that new goes against everything familiar.